So welcome to part 4 of the podcast. If you've made it this far, congrats to you. I hope you are learning, because the message I'm trying to convey is on a much higher level of perspective. I'm trying to convey how organized complexity is working deep within living things and humans and all that, and how these principles of organized complexity are always conserved. Because that is what allows the human to be living. That's what it means to be living. But the living thing really is just a mimicry of the environment. So if you want to say the environment is living, well, that's up to you. But the reality is the fact that the creature or the organism is the part of the environment that is mobile. And then when that becomes complex enough, it becomes self-aware. So you're literally the laws of physics, the environment of Earth, the relationship of Earth with the sun, all the dynamics, all the interactive processes of the laws of physics, they become alive and self-aware as you. That's why God is you. That's what it means. Okay? So we left off part 3 by talking about how your brain stores memory and how every experience that comes through your sense organs and everywhere else that you perceive, right? Everything is stored as the over or under, which is the alteration of a fixed energetic datum, which your brain now stores as a memory. So the memory is categorized according to how that guitar string is plucked. So your brain basically is storing tunes, in a sense, like a set of beats. They are vibrations. Remember when I talked about Riemann's hypothesis and how that is the Fourier representation, which means the frequency representation of the distribution of prime numbers. So if you X-ray distribution of prime numbers, you get some type of nonsensical jumbled data. But you realize that there's something about this jumbled data. It has a geometric pattern to it. The reason why it has that pattern is because of the sixes, because the thing that you are X-raying, much like the crystal structure in the distribution of prime numbers that you are X-raying, they are the sixes. This is why when you get the X-ray, it's scattered all over the place, it's a scattering diagram in a sense. But you notice that even the scattering diagram has a geometric property to it. All the real parts of the complex information, they align themselves along a straight line. Right? That's because each scattering is created by an element of the crystal lattice structure that is exactly where it is supposed to be, so that it balances out every other placement of every other lattice point in that structure. That's what you call equidistribution. So the primes are equidistributed in the most perfect way possible. And the reason why that is happening is because of these sixes. That's the solution to Riemann's hypothesis. But that is the way that complex systems are organized. And this is the process that I call organized complexity. And it is a physics of blackness. Because the central theme doing the organization and guiding it, that's what I call the prime signal. And it guides it along every scale of existence. From the subatomic micro scale to the larger scales of the galaxies and the clusters of galaxies or sheets of galaxies or whatever you want to call them. To the scale of the whole universe. It's all guided according to the same pattern. And the reason for that is so that they can all talk to each other. They're all related to each other. They all influenced each other. They're all one thing. So you are in God. That's what it is. If you want to say, you are in the brain of God or you are in the mind of God, whichever suits your fancy. Alright? So that reality itself is not just random nonsense. There's a presence that is the synchronization of everything. Now the essence of that presence, nobody can know. But that the presence is, that is the proof, because you see the signature everywhere. So the way a creature perceives itself and its environment, the production of these proteins must reference the long-term storage in the DNA, which is then spliced in the RNA in such ways as to represent the moment-to-moment perspicacity of the creature. Each such measured distance is a memory. That is the metabolic distance now, because the way I explain this is that the reference metabolic process is used as a regulator in terms of measurement for every other type of metabolic process. So if you break down fats, if you break down this, if you synthesize any type of protein, these are all energetic reactions. These are all processes that require metabolism. So any metabolic transaction is monitored. And over your lifetime, all the metabolic transactions you will experience, they correlate with, in a sense, your sensual or sensorial experience of the reality in the reality that you have lived. So that the stories that you are telling yourself about the reality generates a response. But the sum total of all those responses across your entire lifetimes, they are measured by the response of your genome. Because that's where the response is really taking place from. For instance, if you see somebody that you know, somebody you haven't seen in a long time, and you come across the person, everything about that person begins to come into your mind, your memory, that's what you call it. You recall. But in order to be able to frame that recall, You must produce the proteins because there's no part of consciousness that is not a metabolic process. Every aspect of your being is run by some type of process. I mean, think of a computer, for instance. I don't like to use this analogy, but think of a computer. There's nothing that happens in the computer that is just some type of from who knows where, except maybe there's something else there or whatever. But what I'm trying to say is that the processor of a computer is processing every behavior of that computer. The processor is responding to your inputs, Your genome is how you respond, because in order to recall that person, you will reference what you stored about that person. In fact, the fact that it's even a person, because the way that knowledge states are built, that's why my theory is based on knowledge spaces, because it is the interaction of these knowledge spaces. That's what builds up organized complexity. Because you don't store the memory as a person. No, it's broken down into levels that don't even look like anything like a person. The point of view where you begin to assemble a person, it's much higher in the processing. What word will I use apart from processing? It's much higher in the recall, because the way these things are stored, they're stored as metabolic transactions, how much energy, how much deviation, how much this, how much that. And these are very simple things, but they're stored in humongous quantities. And then the relationship between those things are patterned by neurons. Different neurons that talk to each other, right? Is because they have a relationship based on this convergence of knowledge spaces. That's really what it is. You see? So when you recall somebody, you are pulling together a tremendous lot, because you have to access the DNA in your neurons. You access it, meaning you have processes that read it, transcribe a protein that represents what you are experiencing. So that person that you are seeing and the recall, they correspond to a tremendous number of different processes in your brain and all over your body, responding in real time. The complexity is stupefying. It doesn't work without blackness. That's why you have neuromelanin. Some people wonder why you have neuromelanin. Why do you need neuromelanin in your brain? Why is it that at the end of the day, human beings are the only creatures on planet Earth with significant quantities of neuromelanin in their brain? What do you need it for? It's there because without it, you're finished. Your brain will burn out immediately. After processing one or two things, your brain just burns out. That neuromelanin is there, making sure that your brain is not filled with the toxins that make such continuous operation impossible to achieve. Because your brain is the primary oxidizing agent in your body. It's literally producing all these things that you need to get rid of in some way, or to recycle or whatever. That's what neuromelanin is doing there. It is the lack of biological symphony, because it needs perfection to sustain life so that people don't die. You must sustain the complexity at a very high level, meaning it requires active maintenance. And there are processes to do that. It's just that those processes are blocked. They're currently blocked. So we age and die. But when those processes are unblocked, then nobody ages anymore. But you have to understand is that the nature of the reality that we are processing, that's what's leading to that death. That's why in the narrative it says, once you do this, you will surely die. Because that's what the thing that is being generated. It's the consequence of the physical process. That's what that thing is saying. And the people who wrote it, they knew. They also know what the the sword that points in every direction. They know what it is. Otherwise, how would they have written it there? That's left for you and me and everybody on earth to figure out, because right now I don't know what it is that we're doing. We think that it's some type of biochemical chemical that we can just apply and then everything presto, while we keep the evil that we are. This evil, you think it's coming from nowhere? It's coming from, like I said, when I use the word we, I'm not talking about me. The greatest evil in the world, what evil really is on the planet right now, is racism, white supremacy. And if you've listened to my podcast on how worlds end, you will understand why. It's part of the Torah Insights. You will understand why. It is in two parts. It's actually free to view right now. Why worlds end. It's all tied to all of that. Racism is a great evil, but it's something that is being produced in the mind. It's a particular type of dysfunction in the mind. A dysfunction tied to that environment, that early environment, that human beings were not supposed to live in that environment, because you become your environment. So it's an environment that people should not have lived in, because if you live in that environment, you become dysfunctional, because the environment itself is dysfunctional. So the people who have emerged from that environment, some of them carry that dysfunction to a very high level, and they are spreading it all over the earth. They saw other people who did not live in that environment, who are not dysfunctional, who didn't carry any of that. Then they decided to turn those people dysfunctional too. It's like the devil wants to corrupt everybody so that he can say, okay, everybody is corrupt now, so what? That's how trauma works. Because there's a level where trauma gets to, it becomes evil. So moving on. The production of these proteins must reference the long-term storage in DNA. which is spliced in the RNA in such ways as to represent the moment-to-moment perspicacity of the creature. For self-aware thinking creatures, the incredibly fantastic scale and complexity of protein synthesis in the brain must take place in real time and in accordance with the metabolic datums, so that they are forced to be produced along very specific gradients. There are an infinity of these gradients, but proteins synthesized along same or similar gradients functionally interlock coherently like Lego blocks. And this is the nature of coherent thought and self-awareness. It is the nature of the convergence of knowledge spaces. So in my book, I describe knowledge spaces, but I didn't invent knowledge spaces. It was invented in the area of automated learning or computerized learning. But I borrowed the idea of knowledge spaces because it served the function of what I wanted to define. But the interesting contribution that I have in that area is the convergence of knowledge spaces, because when you have proteins, they are functional knowledge spaces, because the basic ingredients for synthesizing organized complexity are knowledge spaces, and they always converge into each other. They always blend into each other and merge into it. They interact